Welcome to every appearance of Cordiality, written by nom de plume Eden Forster and beautifully read by Ana-Rita, a professional human voice replica. Immerse yourself in this charming Regency-era historical romance that will captivate your heart and imagination. Happy listening! Chapter 1. A companionable warmth existed between the two elegant ladies who sat across from each other in the carriage, which meant not only were they sisters, but they were also the closest of friends. Still, long confinement within such tight quarters would not prevent one or the other of the two from complaining. On that particular day, it was the younger sister's favourite means of passing the time away. But it must very materially lessen their chance of marrying men of any consideration in the world, uttered Miss Caroline Bingley, and not for the first time since her brother Charles had done the unthinkable and married the eldest of 5 Bennet daughters some months earlier. She blew a frustrated breath in recollection of those sage words. If only Charles had listened to Mr. Darcy, our family would not find itself in such an unenviable position as being permanently connected to such a lowly family, one so lacking in fortune and propriety as to be deemed laughable. I cannot begin to count the doors that have been closed to me in the wake of our brother's foolishness. "Come now, Caroline," cried her elder sister Louisa, closing her fashion magazine and laying it aside. "Were you to be completely honest with yourself, you would confess that more than a few of those closed doors to which you are referring were never open to you in the first place, despite your rather sizable dowry. Lest you forget, in the eyes of society, our own family is not so far removed from trade as our fortune might otherwise suggest." A rather handsome woman who, like her younger sister, had been educated in one of the first private seminaries in town, as well as one who had believed herself quite fortunate to have attracted and married a gentleman of leisure, Mrs. Louisa Hurst, née Bingley, certainly thought rather highly of herself. She too felt a sense of entitlement as a consequence of her family's fortune, but she was not nearly so apt to think so meanly of others as was her sister. The younger woman huffed. "That may very well be, but even you will admit that our brother's alliance has not helped advance our acceptance as much as it would have had he married another, a young woman with her own connections and wealth." The other arched her brow. "Do you mean to say someone like Miss Georgiana Darcy?" "Not someone like Miss Darcy, but rather Miss Darcy herself." A deep sigh of frustration escaped her once again. "I shall always cherish the idea of what might have been had our brother simply done that which was the favourite wish of so many and married Georgiana. So far as I can recall, those who harboured such a wish were few and far between." "It was my favourite wish," Caroline replied in her own defence. "Surely you wanted it too. You cannot deny it. So did Mr. Darcy, but I am sure he would never admit to it now." She was all too aware that Mr. Darcy had been the one to tell her brother that the eldest Bennet daughter was in Cheapside, on the heels of his return from Kent during the early spring, even though he too had been complicit in keeping it a secret upon first learning of the young ladies being in town beforehand. Even now she was not sure she had forgiven him. Louisa said, "Indeed, I would not expect Mr. Darcy to admit such a thing now, especially as he stood up for Charles during the wedding and has returned to Netherfield for a visit on the heels of our brother's return from his wedding journey. Although," she continued after a reflective pause, "I suspect his visit to Netherfield has nothing at all to do with our brother." Caroline looked at her sister with astonishment. "What in heavens are you saying, dearest Louisa?" "You need not to be coy with me, Caroline. You and I both know the reason for your own haste in returning to Netherfield Park. The idea of Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet being in each other's company abhors you. I wager he has not forgotten her amazing dark eyes and is no doubt basking in them as we speak." Hardening her voice, the young lady replied, I will not deny that I will do everything in my power to prevent Mr. Darcy from falling into the same trap as my brother. I am in love with Mr. Darcy. I plan to be the next mistress of Pemberley." She crossed one arm over the other in defiance. "There, I said it, as I have done and will continue to do so, until my favourite wish comes true. Saying that, what must possibly be your own excuse for so willingly agreeing to my scheme to journey to Hertfordshire?" The elder offered a bemused smile. "It is quite simple, my dear. Such a spectacle as this visit promises is something I would not dream of missing for anything in the world." In an instant both ladies were slightly taken aback when Louisa's husband, Mr. Harvey Hurst, whom they thought to be sound asleep, uttered, "Here, here." Quite alarmed, the ladies looked at each other and then they looked at him. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Caroline exclaimed, "pray go to sleep." Chapter 2. Meanwhile, it was all Mr. Darcy and Miss Elizabeth could do not to steal away from the company of Elizabeth's new brother-in-law and her dearest sister, Charles and Jane Bingley. Pretending not to be the two happiest people in all of England was no small feat, yet they had somehow managed it for at least a few days. Standing across the room speaking with Bingley that day, the sight of his intended dressed in a pretty light-coloured gown nearly took Darcy's breath away. Hence, it was much to Darcy's delight when his friend Bingley, being a newly wedded husband who was equally smitten with his bride, exercised the perfect excuse of quitting Darcy's side by hurrying to his wife's side and smothering her with adoration. Darcy took advantage of his friend's preoccupation with Mrs. Bingley to approach his own lovely lady. His voice lowered, he said, "Soon I will be at liberty to behave in such a love-struck manner publicly with you, my love." "I can hardly wait," she replied in a hushed tone. Then in that playful manner which he found so adorable, she smiled at him, moistening her lips. Mr. Darcy's reaction was immediate as well as telling. "I do not know how I will be able to keep up this pretence if my dearest, loveliest Elizabeth is intent on such teasing behaviour as this. You are cruel, young lady." She leaned forward. "Am I, Mr. Darcy? Surely you must realise your power over me. However, if you do not, it shall be my pleasure to enlighten you." After lowering her eyes and seemingly allowing them to linger on his lips for a few moments, she raised her eyes and met his gaze. "I should hate to suspend any pleasure of yours, sir." "What are the two of you discussing?" Charles Bingley asked, heading to the part of the room where Darcy and Elizabeth stood. Tearing his eyes away from his lovely companion, Darcy observed that Jane was no longer in the room. He would have been lying if he said he did not wish his friend Bingley had followed his wife's lead. Darcy said nothing even as his friend and he now stood side by side, which encouraged Elizabeth to speak. Her face rather flushed, she said, "Mr. Darcy and I were merely speaking of his trip from town and how it compared to his travels to other parts of the country. Were we not, Mr. Darcy?" The gentleman nodded. "Indeed." "Capital," said Bingley. "I cannot tell you how delightful it is to see the two of you getting along so charmingly. We must do everything in our power to keep my friend Darcy here at Netherfield with us for a good long while. Do you not agree, Elizabeth?" Darcy was a little amused to watch Elizabeth's uneasy reaction to his friend's question. Before she could reply, he said, "With such pleasant company as this, I cannot think of any other place I would rather be. I hope you will continue to feel that way at this time tomorrow." "Why would I not?" Darcy asked, an amiable fellow who never had an unkind thing to say about anyone. Bingley's smile waned. "I fear I must apologise in advance for what I am about to tell you. You see, it has to do with my sisters." Darcy fought to keep his calm composure in the wake of what he expected his friend to say. He silently urged Bingley to continue his speech. "I have learned that they are planning to come to Hertfordshire as soon as later this evening, certainly no later than tomorrow. Caroline must have discovered that you are my guest, and, well, I do not suppose I need to say more." Bingley really did not need to say more. He had hardly finished his last sentence when the door of the drawing-room swung open, and in pranced Miss Caroline Bingley, wearing what was indubitably the latest in London fashion. Next, in walked Mrs. Louisa Hurst with her husband, Mr. Hurst, trailing slowly, almost reluctantly, behind her. "Mr. Darcy!" Miss Bingley exclaimed. She hurried to his side and seized him by the arm. Giving no mind at all to her brother and Elizabeth, she said, "Why, I had no idea you were here at Netherfield. Oh, what a delightful surprise this is." Amid Miss Bingley's fawning all over Mr. Darcy, Jane returned to the room. At once she looked at her sister Elizabeth to see how she bore this intrusion, and silently apologised before welcoming Netherfield's newest guests. After the usual civilities were exchanged and the requisite inquiries about the trip from town were made, Jane invited her guests to retire to their respective apartments to refresh themselves after their journey. Not very long after that, everyone reunited for dinner. Miss Bingley, who was standing beside Mr. Darcy and clinging to his arm, said, "How fortunate I am to have you as my own personal escort this evening, sir. It is a most unexpected pleasure indeed." Darcy freed himself from the young lady's clinging grip. "I beg your pardon, I plan to escort Miss Bennet to the dining-room." Miss Bingley was slightly taken aback. Quickly recovering, she said, "But, sir, you and I are so charmingly matched, and I am sure there is no reason at all to extend Miss Eliza such a courtesy." "I know how much the two of you do not get along," Charles Bingley interrupted. "Oh, but that was before. Darcy and my sister have a new understanding now. Is that not correct?" As neither had any reason to fear that Bingley's suspicions of the truth had been truly awakened, and as the question was not explicitly directed to Darcy or Elizabeth, neither of the two responded. "What are you saying, Charles?" Miss Bingley asked, her voice filled with a hint of annoyance, mixed with impatience. "Simply that my best friend and my dear sister are of the same mind as regards enjoying a delightful house party for as long as Darcy is here." Bingley rubbed his chin. "Why, Caroline, what did you think I was saying?" That a man of Mr. Hurst's gluttonous constitution might be kept from his place at the dinner-table for too long was unconscionable. "What does it matter what anyone has to say when dinner awaits?" the hungry gentleman soon interrupted. Taking his wife's arm, he took his sister-in-law's arm in his as well. "Now that all that is settled, I say we make haste to the dining-room." Chapter 3. Given the astounding turn of events the day before, and the hastiness in which things unfolded, a restful slumber eluded Elizabeth. Thoughts of everything she had to conceal accompanied her to sleep the night before. Those same thoughts greeted her when she awakened that morning. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide her smile. It was no use, for her great joy would not be repressed. She sat up in bed and cradled her knees to her chest. Being engaged to a man of Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy's consequence was no small matter, and she was the lucky woman who could boast of such a claim. I know we decided among ourselves to keep the news of our engagement a secret, and thus allow ourselves the chance to improve our acquaintance before it is all that is talked about. But keeping such a happy affair as this from Jane is no small feat. The day before she had been sorely tempted to tell her elder sister everything on more than one occasion. The ticking clock on the fireplace mantel caught her attention. She knew without glancing in its direction that she had better get up from her bed and set out for her morning walk if she were to keep her promise with Mr. Darcy to meet him on their now favourite lane, the one that led to the gazebo. She had no sooner tossed the pastel-coloured bed-covers aside and swung her feet to the floor when she heard a tap on the door. Her sister Jane opened the door and poked her head inside. "You are still here. I was hoping you would be." Smiling, Elizabeth extended her hand, encouraging her sister to enter the room. "Jane, this is an unexpected surprise. I supposed it would be hours before you and Charles awakened this morning." Still very much the besotted newlywed, Jane's face coloured. She said, Oh, Lizzie, I simply could not linger in bed a moment longer. I did not have a chance to speak with you last night, and I wanted to apologize for Caroline's behaviour. As you know, I never would have invited her, but as she is Charles's sister, and consequently my sister, I feel I have no choice other than to embrace her. Although Jane was much too kind to point out the obvious reason that her unmarried sister-in-law had arrived at Netherfield so unexpectedly, the irony of Miss Caroline Bingley coming without warning to Hertfordshire within days of Mr. Darcy's arrival was not lost on Elizabeth. The last time the two young ladies had been in each other's company was at Jane's wedding. Caroline had made such a spectacle of ingratiating herself with Mr. Darcy. The young lady's behaviour the evening before showed she was just as intent on winning Mr. Darcy's hand as ever before. No doubt she will be disappointed, Elizabeth silently considered. Resisting the temptation to flaunt her newly established relationship with Mr. Darcy at Miss Bingley's expense the evening before had proved quite a challenge. On the other hand, Elizabeth was not designed for such pettiness. I shall leave such childish antics to Miss Bingley. Jane, promise me you will never again apologise to me on Caroline Bingley's behalf. I know all too well that in matters of the heart, one must take the good with the bad. In light of all of Charles's goodness, abiding his wicked sister is a small price to pay, would you not agree? Even if Jane did agree, Elizabeth did not expect her to confess it aloud. Jane was too kind to do anything of the sort. She said, "And you must promise me that you will not allow Caroline's presence to chase you away." "I should never dream of it." As much as Elizabeth disliked Jane's sister-in-law, she could tolerate her antics far better than she could tolerate her mother's none too subtle way of subjecting her to misery and guilt over her failure to secure a husband. So far as her mother was concerned, she had done all in her power to find a husband for her second daughter, a perfectly decent man whom Elizabeth had spurned. Now Elizabeth was on her own. "Thank heavens! I know Longbourn is only 3 miles away, but having you stay here at Netherfield is such a comfort to me." Jane gave her sister a warm embrace. "Shall the two of us head downstairs for breakfast, just as we always did when we were at Longbourn?" Elizabeth enjoyed staying at Netherfield as much as Jane enjoyed having her there. It was such a welcome reprieve from her mother's antics, as well as those of her younger sisters, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. However, she did miss her father. The thought of him, and how he might suffer the news of her engagement to Mr. Darcy, of all people, recalled her to her purpose. "Oh, Jane, I must beg to be excused. It is such a lovely morning, and you know how much I enjoy walking during the early hours." "I do indeed," Jane said, strolling to the window for a peek outside. She hesitated a moment and then turned to face her sister. "Would your eagerness to commence your morning walk this particular morning have anything to do with our other house guest, Mr. Darcy? Why do you ask such a thing? I just saw him hurrying toward the lane which leads to the gazebo. Is there something I ought to know, Lizzie?" Elizabeth said nothing and continued her morning routine. "Lizzie, I know that you were eager to see him when we last spoke on the matter," Jane said. "I am also aware his early arrival afforded you 2 time alone. And how would you know that? I am mistress of the manor, am I not? I have the means of finding out these things. Now tell me all there is that I have yet to learn. Do not think for one moment that I did not notice the friendly accord that existed between you two throughout most of the evening, and the way he attempted to shield you from Caroline. Jane, I want to tell you everything, and trust me, in time I will. It is just that," Elizabeth began, her eyes fixed on the steadily ticking mantel clock. "Well, you see, I can hardly do the conversation justice now, for I really must be on my way." "Heaven forbid you might keep the gentleman waiting," Jane teased. "Well, go on, but rest assured I shall expect a full account once you have returned." "Oh, Jane, thank you for your understanding. Trust me when I say you will be immensely pleased." A short while later, Elizabeth walked out of her apartment satisfied that she was not really keeping her happy news from her dearest sister after all. True, Jane did not know all the particulars, but surely she knew enough to suspect that Elizabeth and Darcy had reached an understanding. The burden of secrecy now lightened, Elizabeth quickly made her way down the stairs and out the door to enjoy the fresh morning air and time alone with Mr. Darcy. Chapter 4. Darcy had also received an early morning visitor in his apartment. It was his friend Charles Bingley, armed with an apology for his sister's untimely visit and an invitation for Darcy to join him for a brisk morning ride, just as they did when Darcy accompanied him to Netherfield the year before at Michaelmas. Darcy made some excuse of wanting time alone, along with a promise to make amends, which was enough to satisfy his friend. He was busy arranging a small spread of fresh fruit, cold meats, and cheese on a blanket when Elizabeth approached him. She cleared her throat, summoning his attention. Standing, he hurried toward her and reached out his hand and seized hold of hers. "I hope you do not mind that I took the liberty of having a basket prepared for the two of us. I am famished, and the prospect of sitting at the breakfast table with anyone but you holds no appeal for me. I am afraid Miss Bingley will be terribly disappointed." He placed his finger on Elizabeth's lips. "Do not speak to her name, or she may jump out from behind the hedgerows." This teasing side of her intended pleased her, but not half as much as his soft touch, which immediately reminded her of their first kiss. A most unexpected happenstance during a heated argument over George Wickham, as she recalled. Refusing to be intimidated, she had drawn closer and closer to Mr. Darcy until they were standing as close as two people could be. Growing angrier by the moment, yet endeavouring to maintain every appearance of composure, she had said, "Do you deny that you withheld the advantages that were designed for him, and in so doing you have condemned him to his present state of poverty?" Her neck strained, their faces were inches apart. "All this you have done for your own selfish purposes, and yet you regard him with contempt." His eyes fixed on hers, his tone troubled and deeply affected, Darcy said, "Is this truly your opinion of me?" Never had Elizabeth been so affected by any man, so inexplicably drawn to any man. They were standing so close, his masculine scent of cedarwood and juniper intoxicated her, though she would never had admitted it. The heat radiating from their bodies making it beyond her power to resist the taunting temptation he posed when he reached out his hand and slowly traced his fingers along her cheek. She did not protest, nor did she retreat. Her eyes challenging and filled with fire, her lips parted. He leaned closer and closer. Moistening her lips, Elizabeth followed suit, and then they kissed. Their heated debate seemingly forgotten, rather evidencing itself in their combined lips, Darcy and Elizabeth fell easily into each other's embrace. An unfamiliar, unforgettable sound she wished to hear from that moment forward escaped her, a soft, sweet moan. Will every moment spent alone with him from this moment on afford the opportunity for such intimacy and affection? As she had been the one to initiate their second kiss some weeks later, she thought it best to exercise a bit of restraint, for it would not do for him to believe that she was a young woman of loose morals. With that thought, Elizabeth squeezed his hand, slowly let go of it, and then eased away. "This is lovely, sir. It looks as though there is enough food here to feed a small army. I wanted to make certain to allow for all of your favourites. Once I am thoroughly acquainted with all of your likes and dislikes, I shall exercise more prudence." He moved closer to her and placed his hand on the small of her back. She trembled. "Come and sit with me," he said. When they were seated comfortably across from each other, Darcy said, "Allow me to apologise for Miss Bingley's behaviour last evening." With a slight roll of her eyes, Elizabeth said, "I fail to comprehend why everyone feels the need to apologise on that woman's behalf." "What do you mean?" First, Jane made a special effort to visit me this morning to apologise for Miss Bingley's behaviour, and now you are apologising as well." Rather than respond to Elizabeth's speech, Darcy arched his brow quizzically. "What is it, sir?" Elizabeth inquired. "Does your sister often visit with you so early in the morning?" She shrugged. "Not as a rule. This morning was a first. Why do you ask?" "Such information might prove to be useful, just in case." Elizabeth arched her brow in turn. "Sir, are you quite certain I am safe remaining under the same roof with you?" "You are perfectly safe, that is to say, for as long as you wish it." "I suppose that is good information for me to know as well." Darcy gave his betrothed a knowing look, and Elizabeth, not quite sure of what to make of this flirtatious side of her future husband, decided to change the subject. "Jane would not say, but I rather suspect she believes there has been a drastic improvement in our relationship." "I take it that you did not confirm her suspicions." "Not in so many words, but I do not know how much longer I can keep the news to myself." Taking her by the hand, he gave it a gentle squeeze. "Perhaps it would be better to tell her. I rather suspect news of an engagement to be married is not something a young lady wishes to keep to herself." Chapter 5. Having prepared herself with more than the usual care that morning, Miss Caroline Bingley was extremely disappointed to enter the breakfast room and find no one there other than her brother-in-law, Hurst. She had even donned what she was sure was Mr. Darcy's favourite colour, burnt orange. There really was no other explanation for why he always looked at her in such a peculiar manner whenever she wore that particular shade. She was determined this time in the country would be well spent, even if she were forced to endure her new sister-in-law's unfashionable relations. Seeing Eliza Bennet when she arrived the day before had not met with her approval at all. The way that young woman cavorted with Mr. Darcy was also a matter of some discomfort for Caroline. She wondered when those two had begun getting along so well. She had meant to tease him mercilessly for what she supposed was merely a bit of appeasement on his part for her brother Charles's sake, for surely Mr. Darcy could take no real pleasure in the former's uncouth relations. "Where is Mr. Darcy this morning?" she asked her brother-in-law, who had not even bothered looking up from his plate when she entered the room. She could hardly believe her sister had married such a glutton, not that she would share her unflattering assessment with Louisa. Mr. Hurst was after all a gentleman of leisure from a family of some importance, which surely counted for something for the Bingleys. Her brother's friendship with Mr. Darcy, albeit significant, was not the same. Mr. Darcy was not family. Caroline had hoped that bit of truth would be changed by the marriage of her brother to Miss Georgiana Darcy, his friend's younger sister. Caroline also supposed that she and Darcy were in perfect agreement with that scheme. He had even been a partner in her attempt to prevent Charles from marrying Miss Jane Bennet. She later considered Darcy a traitor for informing her brother that Jane was in town visiting her relations from Cheapside. Charles's subsequent reunion with Jane ended Caroline's favourite wish that her brother would marry Miss Darcy, and it strengthened her resolve that she would bring about a union between the two families by marrying Mr. Darcy. In all the time she had known him, he had never looked at any woman without finding fault, except for herself, of course. The presumed engagement to his sickly cousin in Kent, Miss Anne de Bourgh, was nothing but wishful thinking on his aunt Lady Catherine de Bourgh's part, Caroline had persuaded herself. She knew Mr. Darcy too well to suppose he could possibly be contented with such a woman, even though Caroline had never laid eyes on her. There had been what she at one time considered his infatuation with Miss Elizabeth Bennet and her fine eyes, but she always took comfort in knowing that Mr. Darcy would never stoop so low as to marry a woman whom he had declared unlikely ever to attract a husband of consequence. Once again she clung to Mr. Darcy's own words. But it must very materially lessen their chance of marrying men of any consideration in the world. Even though all evidence before her belied such sentiments owing to her brother's capriciousness, surely Mr. Darcy himself was incapable of such irrational conduct. What else could she do but cherish such a thought? Mr. Darcy, after all, belonged to her, and no trifling infatuation with a country upstart was going to stand in her way. After nibbling distractedly on a piece of toast, Caroline decided to go outside for a walk. Such a diversion was a rarity indeed, but on that particular morning she had a specific goal in mind. Thoughts of how pleasant it had been when they all first stayed at Netherfield the year before, and how delightful her time with Mr. Darcy would be, this time accompanied her every step of the way. She did not walk very far before her purposeful stroll came to a startling halt. She would rather be blind than to bear witness to the appalling prospect unfolding before her. At a complete loss over what she should do, she clasped her hand over her mouth to stifle both her shock at seeing Mr. Darcy, her Mr. Darcy, kissing Eliza Bennet, her shock as well as her disgust. She always suspected that young woman was just as wild and wanton as her younger sister Lydia Wickham, and now she had undeniable proof. As for Mr. Darcy's role, she owed it to a gentleman's prerogative to satiate his animal urges wherever he would. As his future wife, she knew the task fell squarely upon her shoulders to protect him from himself. For, were it known that he was dallying with Eliza Bennet, a so-called gentleman's daughter, Mr. Darcy might find himself in the unenviable position of having to marry the chit. Caroline would do anything to see that such a dire sentence did not await him. Even if forced to marry Eliza Bennet, Mr. Darcy would meet with the scorn of society. He does not deserve such a fate. Thus resolved, Caroline started easing away, but in doing so she did not see where she was going. She caught herself in time to avoid stumbling backward, but not in time to escape the clandestine lover's notice. Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth ceased kissing. "Miss Bingley," Darcy said, his voice evidencing his surprise, "how long have you been standing there?" Recovering herself, she said, "I suppose the better question is, what in heavens are you thinking, carrying on in this manner with the likes of her? You ought to be extremely grateful that I am the one who happened upon you, and not one of the servants or even my brother, else you would find yourself engaged to marry her. You and I both know what an appalling misfortune that would be." She looked at Elizabeth with disdain, and then back at Darcy. "You need not worry, for I shall not confide in another living soul what I witnessed on the condition that you send her on her way and return to the house with me, at which point I insist you make your excuses to my brother and depart for London, where you need never lay eyes on that woman again." Darcy said, "You presume to know my wishes. I know you well enough to know that your honour would compel you to act against your better judgment if it were known what has unfolded here this morning, and I am simply offering you a means of escape. You may rely upon my discretion." Darcy and Elizabeth looked at each other, and he saw that rather than suffering insult by what Miss Bingley was saying, she was somewhat amused. He looked at Miss Bingley. "You are quite correct. I have been found out, and as generous as you are in offering to keep what you saw to yourself, I simply could not ask such a thing of you. To do so would be entirely selfish on my part." "It is no sacrifice on my part, I assure you. You know there is nothing I would not do for you, for us." "No, I shall not burden you with the unenviable task of safeguarding such a secret." "What are you saying?" "Simply this," he replied, lowering himself to one knee. He took Elizabeth by the hand and raised it to his lips. "Miss Elizabeth Bennet, you have bewitched me body and soul. I love you, I really do. Please do me the honour of accepting my hand." The disappointed lady's astonishment was beyond expression. "No!" Miss Bingley cried in a manner that sent an entire flock of blackbirds fleeing the surrounding trees. Elizabeth paid her no mind. "Yes," she said in dramatic effect worthy of the best London actress. "Yes, Would that I could shout it from the highest mountain, yes! Darcy did his part to express his pleasure that his already intended bride had, in effect, reaffirmed her commitment to him. He was a happy man indeed, and not simply because they had teased Miss Bingley mercilessly, but because their engagement was now out in the open for all the world to know. "No!" the other woman cried once more, this time trying to come between the misguided, according to her calculation, lovers physically. "You do not have to do this." Darcy said, "Ah, but I want to do this, and I have you to thank for showing me just how much Miss Bennet means to me. And you, Miss Bingley, have the privilege of being the first person to wish us joy." "Mr. Darcy," she cried, "how can you be so thoughtless, so cruel? What about the future I have planned for the two of us? I have depended on it." He shrugged. "That is your misfortune and yours alone. It can have nothing to do with me." Still trying to wedge herself between Darcy and Elizabeth, she said, "I will not allow you to throw everything away, not without a fight." Whether what happened next was unintentional on Miss Bingley's part, Elizabeth tumbled backward. Her dress got caught by a branch. She continued to fall. The back of her head struck the blunt edge of a large rock. Darcy, feeling as though his whole future flashed before his eyes, rushed to her side. Their wedding, their first child, his pride, his joy. He threw himself down on his knees. Taking Elizabeth in his arms, he cradled her to his chest. "Elizabeth, my love," he cried out. Dread coursed through every inch of his body in the wake of her lack of response. The other young woman, no doubt sensing the gravity of what was unfolding before her eyes, was quick to assert her innocence, but all to no avail, because there were only the three of them in the alcove that morning. So far as Darcy was concerned, there was only one, his dearest, loveliest Elizabeth, the woman for whom he had waited patiently for so long. I cannot lose her now. "Elizabeth," he pleaded once more. He loosened the ties on her bonnet and allowed it to fall to the ground. Leaning forward, he brushed aside her dark locks and placed a loving kiss atop her head. "Pray open your eyes, my love, open your eyes." Chapter 6. Darcy paced the floor outside of Elizabeth's apartment. Hours had passed since he returned her unconscious body to the house, and still he had received no word of her condition. To make matters worse, Caroline Bingley had refused to leave his side. "Mr. Darcy," she cried, "you must come away from this place. Eliza Bennet's fate now rests in the hands of others. You have done all you can in bringing her here. The rest is beyond your control. I fail to understand why you do not take your own advice in this case and simply go away. Your presence is not required, and if you suppose you are of some comfort to me, you are sadly mistaken." She shook her head. "I do not dare leave you alone outside her door and give everyone the impression that you and Eliza Bennet are anything more than indifferent acquaintances. I plan to marry Miss Bennet. You know this," Mr. Darcy said in a less tranquil tone and with a heightened colour. "As I have said repeatedly, you do not have to martyr yourself on behalf of that woman for the sake of propriety. I have sworn to tell no one of what I saw earlier today. In fact, the more I really consider it, the more I am certain that I saw nothing at all untoward occur between the two of you. Are you mad? Do you suppose that I am the sort of gentleman who would renege on my promise? You saw me get down on bended knee and offer my hand to Miss Bennet. A gesture, I might as well add, that was done solely for your benefit. Then you mean to say you were merely pretending to propose?" Finally, she exhaled a deep sigh of relief, and evidence of a smile crept onto her face. "I say that is a cause for celebration, is it not? What I am saying is Miss Bennet accepted my proposal of marriage days ago." Clearly upset by this intelligence, Caroline tried to throw herself into his arms. He would not allow it. Sobbing, she pounded her fists against his broad chest. "How could you?" she cried. "You know very well that you and I are meant for each other. I am supposed to be your wife. I am meant to be the next mistress of Pemberley." He seized both her arms and eased her away. "Miss Bingley, refrain yourself at once. You are causing a spectacle." "And why would I not? All these years you led me to believe that I meant something to you, that the connection that you and I share was special. How many times have you and I ridiculed those awful Bennets? Now you dare to stand before me and tell me you intend to marry one of them. How could you?" Rounding the corner, Bingley saw what was unfolding, and he raced to his distraught sister's side. "Caroline!" "Oh, Charles!" she cried, surrendering herself to her brother's waiting arms. "Caroline, what is the matter? Is it Elizabeth? Has there been a change for the worst in her condition?" Pulling away, she glared at her brother through tear-filled eyes. "What do I care about Eliza Bennet? She could die for all I care. I wish she would with all my heart." "Surely you cannot mean that. Elizabeth is my wife's dearest sister, my sister." He threw his friend a questioning look. The disturbance of his mind now visible in every feature, Darcy said, "Bingley, will you please remove your sister from my sight this second? Else I shall not be responsible for my actions." Bingley shook his head. "Of course, but you must tell me what all this is about. I shall explain everything in due time. For now, Elizabeth's well-being is my sole concern, and your sister's presence is not helping matters one bit." "Of course," Bingley said. "Of course," he repeated knowingly, and ignoring his sister's protests, led her down the hall and out of Darcy's sight. Chapter 7. Elizabeth's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Bennet, had arrived at Netherfield some time ago and were sitting by the bedside keeping watch over her. Their demeanour being a mixture of fearfulness, wariness, and hopefulness, neither seemed to notice Mr. Darcy pacing outside Elizabeth's apartment amid the comings and goings of servants and the doctor. At some point during their vigil, they must have been informed of Darcy's concern in the matter, because Mr. Bennet wandered outside the door looking rather grave but inquisitive. His hands tucked behind his back, he strode over to Mr. Darcy. "I understand I am indebted to you, sir, for bringing my daughter here." Now somewhat composed, Miss Bingley raced down the hall to join the party and seized the chance to direct the conversation. Feigning a measure of compassion she did not truly feel, she said, "Indeed," she paused for a second to catch her breath, "Mr. Darcy and I were outside enjoying a perfectly wonderful stroll in the garden when we came across your daughter in that dreadful condition." "Miss Bingley," Mr. Darcy protested, giving her a stern, rebuking look. He turned to the older man. "I beg your pardon, sir. Pray pay no attention to Bingley's sister. How is Miss Bennet? Has she opened her eyes? Has she asked for me?" Mr. Bennet appeared taken aback by the rapidity as well as the meaning of the younger man's questions, especially the last one, and what it suggested. Seeing this, Miss Bingley placed her hand on Darcy's arm. Tugging slightly, she cried, "Mr. Darcy, you do not have to do this. For all that is sacred, I implore you, do not do this." Known best for his quick wit and sardonic humour, Mr. Bennet said, "At the risk of being impertinent, I must ask you, sir, what is it that this young woman is trying so desperately to prevent you from saying? Is there something regarding my daughter's mishap that I ought to know about?" Miss Bingley's protective instincts would not be suppressed. "Mr. Bennet, events unfolded exactly as I said. Had Mr. Darcy and I not happened across your daughter when we did, who is to say what might have become of her?" "That is quite enough, Miss Bingley," Mr. Darcy stated, loosening his arm from her ever-tightening grip. "Sir, indeed, there is something you ought to know. It has to do with your daughter and me. We had planned to tell you, and then this unfortunate accident occurred." "Tell me what?" Mr. Bennet asked impatiently, his expression pained. "Sir, I have asked your daughter to marry me, and she has accepted my offer." The older gentleman's countenance was not overspread with the joy that such an occasion would generally call for, no doubt attributable to the fact that his favourite daughter was on the other side of the door, unable to speak for herself. He merely stood there in silence. Questions of when such a proposal might have taken place, and, more importantly, why, raced through Mr. Bennet's busy mind. From what he knew of his daughter, she did not even like the gentleman who stood before him, the gentleman whom everyone in Meryton knew to be a proud, haughty fellow who only looked at any woman to find fault. What was more, Mr. Bennet knew the gentleman had arrived in Hertfordshire just days before. He had so many questions, and without his daughter to supply a collaborative response to what Mr. Darcy had said, he did not quite know what to believe. The lingering presence of Miss Caroline Bingley did not help the matter at all, for whatever was the situation, it was apparent to him that the last thing that young woman wanted was for Mr. Darcy to align himself with the Bennets. At length he found his voice. "There is much I would say to you, young man, but now is not the time. I only meant to step away from my daughter's side for a moment, to express my gratitude to you. To answer your earlier question, there has been no change. My Lizzie remains unconscious. The doctor is hopefully optimistic, and that is all I will say for now. Pardon me," he concluded, and spinning around on his heel went back inside his daughter's apartment. Mr. Bennet saw upon entering his daughter's room that his dear wife was still sitting patiently by Elizabeth's side, doing what she could to comfort her. A woman whose business in life was marrying her daughters and whose greatest pleasure was attending the affairs of others, she must have seen the members of the Netherfield party who remained outside the door. Do my eyes deceive me, or was that Mr. Bingley's friend I saw just then, the proud Mr. Darcy? Holding up his hand to encourage his wife to say no more, he nodded. He too resumed his former attitude by her side. "What is he doing stalking about?" she asked in a quieter voice. "I know that he was the one who discovered our Lizzie, but is that any reason for him to be lingering about in the hallway?" "I shall tell you all that I know soon, my dear." Whatever was his wife's response, he hardly attended it. His mind was filled with questions that demanded answers. He reached for his daughter's hand, discouragingly cool to his touch. He started rubbing it lovingly between his. His thoughts beckoned. "Can any of what that gentleman said be true, my dearest Lizzie? Is it possible that you have accepted this man? I thought you hated him." Amid his flurry of silent questions, he espied his wife heading towards the door, saying something or another about getting to the bottom of things. It was just as well, he considered, for if she were to learn of Mr. Darcy's supposed proposal to their daughter, she would certainly not hear it from him. Only a declaration from his daughter would persuade him that such a thing was true. Chapter 8. The door to Elizabeth's room flew open, causing Darcy to halt his pacing, spin around on his heel, and retrace his path down the hallway with alacrity. Even the sight of Elizabeth's mother, Mrs. Fanny Bennet, did not discourage him. She looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulder, as any mother would after having sat with an unconscious child. Darcy could never recall a time when the two of them had been civil toward each other. His strongest impression of the lady was established early on in their acquaintance during the Netherfield ball, when he heard her boast aloud that her eldest daughter would soon be the mistress of Netherfield, effectively implying that his friend Bingley was on the heels of marrying her long before it was the thing to do. Nothing that he had seen or heard from the woman in the ensuing months had changed his impression of her, but as she was Elizabeth's mother, he supposed he ought to put his past grievances aside. Bingley had indeed married her eldest daughter, and now, God willing, he would be marrying her second eldest. When Darcy approached Mrs. Bennet without ceremony, she appeared a bit taken aback at first, which gave him cause to wonder. Does Elizabeth's mother really dislike me so much? If indeed she did, then he knew he had no one to blame but himself. How many times had he showed his own disapproval of her during his first visit to Hertfordshire? Too many, he considered, always choosing to meet her ridiculousness with condescension. Not this time. I can do this, he silently resolved. Pardon me, he said with a slight bow. Why, Mr. Darcy, you are precisely the gentleman I had hoped to see. I understand my family is quite indebted to you for having come across our Lizzie when you did. I am certain I do not know how we shall ever repay your kindness, sir. Your family owes me nothing, I assure you. I would ask, however, how is Miss Bennet? Has she opened her eyes? Has she asked for— Here, Darcy held his tongue. It was true that Elizabeth was the most important person in the world to him, but her family's own worries and concerns must be uppermost in everyone's mind. Is there anything I can do to ease your worries, Mrs. Bennet? He asked. I am your humble servant. No doubt amazed by this side of him, she cried, Oh, Mr. Darcy, I hardly know what to say. Your generosity is unparalleled. I feel it is incumbent upon me to tell you that I will do anything and everything in my power to aid in Miss Bennet's recovery. I have summoned my physician from town to attend her. Wanting to put his future mother-in-law further at ease, he continued, And should you and your family require anything at all, please do not hesitate to ask, and it shall be done. Alone with his daughter for the first time since arriving at Netherfield after learning of her accident, Mr. Bennet drew his chair closer to the bed. His previously silent prayers, he now voiced aloud. Pray come back to us, my dear child. Pray open your eyes. Memories of her younger days flashed through his mind, at times prompting faint chuckles, even those sprinkled with his own tears. You have so much of life ahead of you, my Lizzie. So much indeed. Marriage to a decent and respectable man, a home of your own, a house full of children, my grandchildren whom I no doubt will cherish as much as I cherish you. All the things a parent wished for a most beloved child whisked through his busy mind. The idea of mentioning the young man pacing just outside her door occurred to him, but did he dare? If it were true, surely it would make a difference to her. But if it were true, what circumstances had brought it about? Whatever had led to the gentleman's current understanding of the way things were between them might either be wrought with scandal or teeming with joy. No doubt Miss Bingley viewed the situation unfavourably. The young woman even supposed she could discourage Mr. Darcy from his own purpose of confiding in me. Another moment's reflection reminded Mr. Bennet of that which he and his second-born had most in common with each other. In the midst of his anguish he smiled inside. The Lizzie that I know and love must surely find such a notion as an alliance with the haughty young master of Pemberley ridiculous. Surely she would laugh at the absurdity of it all. With that thought in mind, Mr. Bennet knew exactly what he needed to do next. Lizzie, my dear, there is a young man just outside your door who is longing to see you. Indeed, my child, and you will be quite diverted by what he has to say. I suppose he fancies himself in love with you. At least, I would hope he does, for he said that he has offered you his hand in marriage, and you, my dear, have accepted it. He says you are to be his wife. Elizabeth stirred. She opened her eyes slowly, adjusting to the bright sun outside her window. Mr. Darcy. Chapter 9. In view of her astonishment over Mr. Darcy's compassion for her daughter and even her family, Mrs. Bennet hardly knew how to carry on. She had never even liked this man, and it was mostly due to his behaviour at the Meryton Assembly all those months ago, specifically how he had slighted Elizabeth in saying she was not handsome enough to tempt him. No one spoke ill of a member of her family without incurring her displeasure. Could this benevolent gentleman standing before me really be the proud Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, a single gentleman with £10,000 a year, the one who reportedly owns half of Derbyshire? Her mind grappling with the possibilities his generous words entailed, she opened her mouth to speak. In an instant, everyone's attention was immediately seized when the door to Elizabeth's apartment opened and out walked a teary-eyed Mr. Bennet. A flurry of varying emotions ripped through the hearts and minds of those standing there, their breaths bated. "Mr. Bennet," his wife cried. "Our Lizzie is awake," he said to his lady reassuringly. Lifting her skirt ever so slightly in preparation for a swift escape into the room, she exclaimed, "I must go to her." Bennet held up his hand. "And you will in time, for now she has asked to see... Here," he directed his gaze toward Mr. Darcy. "She asks to see you, sir." Darcy was gone directly. Mrs. Louisa Hurst pounced on her sister as she descended the stairs. "Caroline, my dear, I have been searching all over for you for hours. What has happened? Did I hear someone, Mrs. Bennet, no doubt, screaming? Is it Eliza Bennet? Is she—" "Eliza Bennet has opened her eyes," Miss Bingley declared, promptly interrupting her sister. "I am afraid that unseemly outburst is one of jubilation rather than sorrow." "You say that as though it is not a good thing. Is this not what we have all been praying for ever since Mr. Darcy rescued Eliza from her fall, that she would quickly recover?" Miss Bingley crossed one arm over the other. "Indeed, except in this case she has more than recovered. It would appear she has secured a promise of marriage from Mr. Darcy." "Oh, Louisa, do you know what this means? I will tell you what it means. My own hopes for a future with the man I love are ruined. I shall never be mistress of Pemberley, and I cannot help feeling that I brought this on myself. Oh, dear Caroline, what could you possibly have done to alter your fate as the next Mrs. Darcy?" She pursed her lips. "Unless, of course, you are referring to the eager manner in which you put yourself in his path at every turn, or perhaps—" By now the two ladies had entered the drawing-room and were sitting on the gold brocade sofa by the fireplace. Again Miss Bingley interrupted her sister. "Of course not. What I meant is, had I not happened upon the two of them on a secluded path this morning, and had I not witnessed them in a most compromising position, then Mr. Darcy would not have been obliged to offer Eliza Bennet his hand in marriage. He is an honourable man, as you and I both know, and hence he feels he has no other choice. At the risk of sounding unfeeling to what you must be suffering in the wake of all this, I would be remiss if I did not remind you that Mr. Darcy has always been affected by Eliza Bennet and her fine eyes. Is that not the reason for our being here? You wanted to do all in your power to keep those two apart, did you not?" The younger woman slumped on the sofa. "And yet I have failed miserably. I do not believe for a second that he truly wishes for an alliance with those awful Bennets. Now it seems he has no choice, and I cannot help feeling that it is all my fault." "Your fault?" "Indeed, because I saw what I saw. Is it not entirely likely that you are mistaken about Mr. Darcy? If indeed you saw him and Eliza Bennet in a compromising position, then it is because they are in love with each other. You know Mr. Darcy too well to suppose that he would trifle with a young woman merely for sport." "Do I, Louisa? Is it not in a man's nature to have his way with women of loose morals, women the likes of those Bennet sisters?" "Perhaps. No, of course you are right. In general that is the way of the world, but Mr. Darcy is not just any man. He is honourable and decent. You know all this. I wager he and Eliza Bennet reached an agreement long before the encounter you witnessed this morning." Caroline sighed. "That is what he said." Speaking these words out loud was one thing, but it was hardly sufficient to conciliate her. "Then why do you not believe him?" The younger woman burst into tears. "Because for the longest time all I have ever wanted was to marry Mr. Darcy, to be the next mistress of Pemberley. I thought he wanted those same things too. For me to accept that he willingly offered his hand in marriage to another is for me to accept that I never meant anything to him at all." Accepting her sister's embrace, Caroline continued weeping. "I am simply not ready to believe such a thing. I do not know that I ever will be. Truer words had never been spoken. Relinquishing her favourite wish for herself and the man of her dreams was destined to be the hardest thing she had ever done. When finally her tears abated that night, Caroline allowed herself to dwell on the events that had led to her current predicament. In truth, she wished for just once Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy would look at her the way he looked at the impertinent Miss Eliza Bennet. What does she have that I do not have? Is it a matter of her low standing in life in comparison to my own? Is that the sort of woman he truly desires? As for herself, Caroline had employed her womanly wiles in the best ways she knew how to, for she was a maiden after all. She would most certainly be in virgin territory were she to try to do more than she had done, for instance, venture into his room in the middle of the night. As she had presided over her brother's table during their stay at Netherfield last autumn, and consequently had been the mistress of the house, even a locked door would not have prevented her from paying a late-night call on the gentleman. If she had but one reservation, it was not knowing exactly what was to be done once she found herself alone with him. An all too familiar longing stirred within her as she recalled that day in the carriage. How she had studied him, watched the way he rested so carelessly, so unaware of the effect he had upon her. If only she had been the recipient of his most ardent attentions, the one to whom he pledged himself. The thought carried her into slumber, where she was no longer alone. There, in the carriage, Mr. Darcy looked upon her as though she were the only woman in the world, his every touch speaking of devotion, his whispered words stirring her very soul. Dreams of his lingering kisses did not stop there. Nothing she had ever experienced before could compare to what happened next. Nothing. "Oh, Mr. Darcy," she heard herself crying out. "Oh, Mr. Darcy." Her passionate cries only seemed to encourage him, and she began to wonder if he truly meant to claim her for the rest of all time. Was this truly the start of her life as Mrs. Fitzwilliam Darcy? All too soon she awakened to find herself all alone, aching for her dream to be real, and her heartbreak brought tears to her eyes once more. And then it dawned on her. True, the man who was meant to be hers had offered his hand to another, but what did it signify? Never before had she wavered in her mission to become the next mistress of Pemberley. Did she not owe it to herself to persevere? With this resolve she lulled herself back asleep, and back into Mr. Darcy's loving arms. Chapter 10. Mr. Darcy's London physician prescribed several days of bed rest for Elizabeth upon his arrival early the next day, which suited Darcy's purposes perfectly well. He saw to it that a host of caretakers were also on hand to attend his future wife. That he would not spend prodigious time by Elizabeth's side was unfathomable. Strict adherence to propriety aside, soon enough the two of them would be married. It was not as though Elizabeth were not convalescing under her own sister's roof. The young lovers resolved to pay their detractors, those who felt Elizabeth ought not remain at Netherfield, no mind. Besides, who was to say with certainty that Elizabeth's return to Longbourn and its inherent chaos would not result in a setback? Darcy would not even chance it. What was more, Miss Bingley was acting as though she did not know he and Elizabeth were betrothed. The last thing he wanted was to be around her. On one particular day, Darcy sat in a chair by Elizabeth's bedside, having taken her dearest sister's place, holding her hand in his. Jane's reaction to the happy news of the engagement had been all that Elizabeth and even Darcy had hoped it would be. Jane always did like Mr. Darcy more than anyone else among their circle of family, friends and acquaintances had, and now she liked him even more. And Charles Bingley, being the delightful friend that he was, could not have been more pleased by the betrothal. What remained to be talked about was the precise nature of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's reaction. "Pray tell me, my love, how did your conversation with my father unfold?" Elizabeth asked. Having lately emerged from Bingley's library after a formidable discussion with Mr. Bennet, which had been put off long enough, Darcy replied, "We had a very civil conversation. I must confess that he was a bit more reserved than I remember him to be, but in the end he gave us his blessing. I do not doubt it one bit. Who could possibly refuse a man of your consequence anything he should deign to ask for? The father of the one woman who has promised to make me the happiest man in the world, I would say. I am still not quite certain that I deserve you." "I suppose I might say the same of you, Mr. Darcy. You might have had any number of women, a woman with connections and fortune and noble lineage in keeping with your own, and yet you chose me. Indeed, I do believe I shall be the happiest woman in all the world." Elizabeth freed her hand and touched his chin. "On second thought, make that the second happiest woman in all of England, for surely you have made my mamma the happiest. I take it that your discussion with your mother went well." Elizabeth silently reflected on her mother's joyful prognostications and how wonderful her future life would be. She could not in good conscience subject her intended to a repetition of all her mother had to say. Instead, she said, "Given the fact that my mother had completely abandoned the idea of my ever finding a husband, I would say she was exceedingly pleased indeed." Seeing his countenance cloud, she sought to explain. "Sir, I suppose if you haven't heard by now, you surely will hear about what I am about to tell you at some point in the future." His eyebrows furrowed. Mr. Darcy leaned forward. "Pray, you have not harboured some deep, dark secret?" "Well, it is not so deep, nor it is dark, and I cannot exactly say it is a secret. You see, it has to do with my cousin, Mr. Collins." "My aunt's vicar?" Elizabeth nodded. "I hope it will not trouble you unduly to learn that you were not the first gentleman who offered his hand in marriage to me." "Elizabeth, pray do not tell me that ridiculous man proposed to you." "That is precisely what he did. Now, despise me if you dare. On the contrary, I believe I love you even more, for no doubt you rejected his hand, which proves to me what I always suspected about you." "And what is that?" "You know your own mind, and you are not one to be prevailed upon merely to satisfy the dictates of others. You and I are so much alike in that regard. No doubt we will be a formidable couple. Pray you will bear that in mind when the two of us have our first disagreement as a married couple, which will no doubt occur with some regularity. I believe we both like to have our own way. Now, what say you?" Standing, Darcy leaned forward and placed a sweet kiss atop Elizabeth's head. "I say it is a very good thing that we shall recite our vows and honour and keep to them, especially the one that refers to honouring and obeying thou husband. Are you going somewhere, Mr. Darcy? How dare you leave after staking out such a stance?" "A wise man knows when to take his leave. Pray rest, my love. I shall return later this afternoon, and then we shall resume this discussion where we left off." Lifting her chin, he brushed his lips against hers. "Or not," he added. Elizabeth could not help smiling at his easy manner of redirecting the conversation. "What else might you have in mind?" she asked, her spirits animated. "You shall see," Mr. Darcy promised. Chapter 11. Mr. William Collins hastily sped along the path leading away from Rosings. By his swaggering gait, he suffered quite a sense of accomplishment. And why would he not? He had faithfully served his noble patroness by apprising her of the latest news from Hertfordshire, and hopefully set into motion a course of action that would be the means of exacting his revenge on the people who had been the means of one of the most embarrassing chapters in his young life. Specifically the Bennets of Longbourn in Hertfordshire, who were his own relations no less. Out of the spirits of utmost generosity, he had visited them at what was to be his own future home upon his cousin, Mr. Thomas Bennet's passing, for the Longbourn estate, through no one's fault, was entailed to the male line of the family. Intending to make amends for the unfortunate circumstances of the Bennet daughters' births, Mr. Collins had offered his hand in marriage to the second eldest daughter, only to be ridiculed and scorned. A chance meeting with another young woman on the heels of his embarrassment, the former Charlotte Lucas from a neighbouring estate, allowed him to escape that part of the country with his dignity intact. The last thing his imprudent cousin, who had rejected him for no legitimate reason, should be allowed was the privilege of marrying a man like Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. The otherwise sombre man rubbed his hands together in unfettered glee. "It is all in my noble patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh's hands now. She was positively livid when I told her the news from Hertfordshire. No doubt she is most pleased with me, even if I must say so myself." Her ladyship paced the richly carpeted floor in an irate fashion quite out of keeping with her usual aristocratic air. "This is not to be borne," she yelled, causing her caged birds situated about the ornate parlour quite a measure of agitation and a repetition of said speech. "This is not to be borne. This is not to be borne. This is not to be borne." Her daughter, Miss Anne de Bourgh, came into the room followed by her paid companion. "What in heavens is the matter, mother?" Anne asked in a heightened voice which caused even the faithful servants in the room to look at her questioningly. "I have received the most disturbing intelligence from Mr. Collins about the goings-on in Hertfordshire," Lady Catherine exclaimed. "This is not to be borne," another bird chimed in. "For heaven's sake, someone silence those birds. When did the white one begin speaking anyway?" The servants in the room scurried about the parlour covering the gilded cages. This was no small task considering her ladyship's affinity for the exotic creatures. She boasted of having the finest collection in all the land, with its being years in the making. "This is not to be borne. This is not to be borne." Each bird sang out in no particular turn, their state even more agitated now that they were garnering such undesired attention. "This is not to be borne. This is not to be borne." "There is no time for all that," her ladyship screamed. "Get those birds out of this room and out of my sight." "What did Mr. Collins say, mother? What news from Hertfordshire? What has caused you such distress?" Anne implored once more, only this time with more urgency. "Do I look upset?" Anne nodded. Even her companion, Mrs. Jenkinson, nodded. Knowing her place, the latter rarely responded to anything her ladyship had to say, unless said speech was specifically directed to her. "This is not to be borne." The birds continued singing even as they were being carried from the room. "This is not to be borne." "Well, if I am upset, then I very well ought to be, and you would be too if you knew what your cousin Darcy has done." "What has he done?" Anne cried. "I will tell you what he has done. He has gone off and offered his hand in marriage to another. Heaven and earth! What must he be thinking? Are we owed no more consideration than to learn that he has broken your own tacit engagement than by way of someone so wholly unconnected to his family?" She went on in this angry manner for a quarter hour before turning her attention to Anne's companion. "Mrs. Jenkinson, accompany my daughter to her apartment and assist her in preparing her things." "Where am I going, mother?" Anne asked as her mother marched across the room to ring the bell for her own lady's maid. "It is not just where you are going, but rather where we are going." Anne rephrased the question. "Where are we going, mother?" "We are going to Hertfordshire, both you and I. Together we shall put an end to your cousin's nonsense for once and for all." "But what do you plan to do? From the sound of things, it appears my cousin has made up his mind," Anne cried with energy. "It appears the scheme is settled. Nothing of such importance to our family is settled until I say it is settled. Now, run along. I plan to arrive in Hertfordshire before the sun sets on another day. I have wasted enough time already." The elder daughter of the 5th Earl of Matlock in Derbyshire, England, Lady Catherine married most advantageously to Sir Lewis de Bourgh, and in so doing became the mistress of Rosings Park, one of the grandest estates in all of Kent. A rather opinionated, unpleasant sort of woman of noble birth, she was not used to having her will subjugated by the hopes and wishes of others. It was as though she did not realise that in imposing her will on others, as she so often did, she was indeed guilty of the one offence she would not abide being committed against her. And by now she was on the road again. Twice before she had confronted Miss Elizabeth Bennet in Hertfordshire. Twice before she had failed to carry her point. The first time her ladyship travelled that way, it was with the intention of learning if that young woman was the person with whom her nephew Fitzwilliam Darcy fancied himself in love. The second time her ladyship ventured to Hertfordshire, it was with the intention of persuading that young woman to promise never to have anything to do with her nephew. Her efforts had met with no success, for even the prospect of a fortune, a house in town and financial security for the young lady's mother, her father, and even her unwed sisters were not enough to tempt her. Is there any wonder my efforts were in vain? Why settle for the milk when you can have the whole cow? That impertinent young woman knew my nephew was in her power all along. She needed only to bide her time. Lady Catherine de Bourgh was not someone who broke disappointment with dignity. Miss Elizabeth Bennet was about to face the wrath of one of England's self-described most formidable opponents. That young lady will be sorry she crossed me. "I beg your pardon, mother," said Anne. "I was merely contemplating the fate that awaits Miss Elizabeth Bennet when she and I come face to face once again." "I have been thinking," Anne began, her voice uneasy. "Is this trip really necessary?" "Is this trip necessary?" Lady Catherine repeated in dismay. "How can you even ask me such a question? You of all people! Am I not doing this for you? Is not everything I do, everything I have ever done for you?" At the risk of sounding ungrateful, I fear I must beg to disagree. Disagree? Disagree? If not for you, then whom? In such case as this, I believe you are acting solely on your own accord. "Cease speaking such nonsense," Lady Catherine demanded, her voice losing its particular affection, reserved solely for her daughter and only child. Anne exclaimed with energy, "I do not feel I am speaking nonsense. I believe I am being perfectly reasonable. How many times has my cousin told you that he has no intention of honouring the so-called favourite wish of you and his mother, my late aunt, Lady Anne?" "Silence, daughter," Lady Catherine commanded. "I will not be silenced, not this time. I fear I have held my tongue long enough. Furthermore, what makes you think that should you succeed in thwarting my cousin's plans to marry this young woman, that I would be willing to satisfy your scheme of effecting a marriage between the two of us? I believe I deserve far better than to marry a gentleman who does not wish to marry me." "Anne, how dare you speak to me in this manner? What has come over you?" Moving closer, her ladyship reached over and pressed the back of her hand gently against her daughter's forehead. "Are you ill?" Anne drew her head back. "No, mother. I am perfectly all right, indeed more so than I have been in a long, long while. And now that I have finally spoken my mind, I believe I shall only get better. Now, I implore you to put an end to this foolishness. Signal the driver to turn this carriage around so that we might return to Kent and leave my grown cousin alone, so that he may live his life in the manner which he deems best for himself." "I shall do no such thing." A quick glance out the window informed her that their destination was but a short distance away. She glared at her daughter intently. "I did not travel this far merely to be persuaded from my purposes so easily as you suggest. I shall carry my point. For heaven's sake, mother, if you do not cease this insanity, I swear I will throw myself from this carriage, thus putting an end to both our misery." "Daughter, do not be absurd," Lady Catherine demanded. "I will do it," declared Anne, placing her tiny, frail hand on the door latch. The carriage door flew open, air gushing all about them, Lady Catherine summoned all her strength and resolve, pulling her daughter away from the door and into her tight embrace. Frightened, trembling, Anne's complexion had turned an even sicklier shade of pale. She sobbed. Nearly brought to tears herself, Lady Catherine comforted her daughter in a manner that only a mother could. "My dearest Anne, is the thought of marrying your cousin so terrible?" "No, mother, it is not," she cried. "However, he does not want that. He wishes to marry another. He wishes to marry for love, and, while I never dared to hope for such an alliance, I certainly have no wish to marry a man who may very well grow to hate me." Lady Catherine smoothed her daughter's hair, which had fallen free when her bonnet was swept away by the wind. "Why did you not say something before now, my child?" Anne drew back just enough to look into Lady Catherine's imploring eyes. "Have I not, mother, time and time again?" Her heart weighing heavier and heavier in her chest, Lady Catherine took a moment to glance over all that had brought the two of them to that point, starting with her only child's birth, when in Anne's cradle, Lady Catherine and her beloved late sister, Lady Anne Darcy, had promised her own firstborn to her namesake. What a blessed day that was for the two sisters, so much that bringing about such an alliance had become both sisters' favourite wish. What were always meant to be happy memories did not seem so happy any more. In all the ensuing years, Lady Catherine had taught herself to believe it was her daughter's favourite wish as well, in spite of her nephew's ardent declaration that such would never come to pass. Surely family loyalty would rule the day in the end. Alas, all those things meant nothing to her nephew in the end. "Darcy will not have my daughter. He has decided to turn his back on his obligations. Is there any wonder my daughter would not desire such an alliance with someone who professes to love another? Oh, Anne, will you ever forgive me?" By now the carriage had come to a halt, and one of the drivers poked his head inside. "Pray, accept my apologies for this mishap. I declare I do not know what happened. Are the two of you unharmed, your ladyship?" he asked, his voice overflowing with remorse. "Is everything all right?" Lady Catherine nodded. "It is now." With a wave of her hand she said, "It is now. Carry on." Anne clung even tighter to her mother, instilling in her ladyship a new resolve. "If I do not begin to mend my ways, my daughter might end up all alone. Surely my Anne deserves better. She deserves to have all that is good in life, and it is incumbent upon me to see that she does." "On second thought," her ladyship added, "I fear all is not quite satisfactory. It seems there has been a change of plan. My daughter Anne and I will be returning to Kent. Are you saying you do not wish to continue on to Hertfordshire, your ladyship?" "That is precisely what I am saying. Turn this carriage around. My daughter and I are going home." Chapter 12. That particular morning found Darcy sitting in a chair by Elizabeth's side. With the attending caretaker's permission, Elizabeth had enjoyed a brief outing earlier. While her adventure had been quite a balm for her restless spirits, Darcy suffered a bit of distress. Amid her intended's concerned expression, she said, "I assure you I am feeling better and better with each passing day." "I am pleased to hear you say that. Still, I cannot help blaming myself for your current predicament." "How so, my love?" "Had I behaved in a more gentlemanly manner when the two of us were alone, had I not kissed you then, Caroline Bingley would never have come across the two of us together, and she would not have reacted so viciously. You are hardly to blame for her behaviour. Besides, do you know how many times I have fallen asleep at night, imagining the two of us kissing, and awakened achingly disappointed in not finding you there? Faced with the prospect of dreaming of kissing you and the prospect of actually kissing you, I hope you know which of the two I would prefer." She moistened her lips. "Now, hate me for such wantonness if you dare." On the contrary, my dearest, I love you. I love you more than life itself, he said, leaning closer and sealing his ardent declaration with a kiss. At length Elizabeth said, Since I have professed to being wanton, and you have declared that you love me still, there is one other thing I wish to say, rather ask. Ask me anything, my love. Well, I understand why you have to return to London, she tentatively began. Mr. Darcy nodded. Indeed, to obtain a special licence so that we may be married as soon as can be. I would never wish to be thought of as overly sentimental, but the thought of being parted with you for even a single night is agonising, Elizabeth confessed. You are not being overly sentimental. Rather, you and I are of the exact same mind. I never wish to be parted from you either. However, the sooner I leave, the sooner I shall return, at which point we shall be married, and then we truly shall never have reason to be parted again. I understand, truly I do, but that does not lessen my distress. I would do anything in my power to ease your unrest, anything at all. Will you stay the night with me? Not expecting such a tempting request, Mr. Darcy threw a glance over his shoulder. He laughed a little. I suppose I will manage one night in the chair. I shall return once the household has settled, and if you do not mind, I will move it closer by your bedside. Anything to please you, my love. Thank you, sir. No, thank you, Elizabeth. You cannot know what it means to know you want me by your side. I am sure the pleasure is all mine. I can promise you that it will be, my love, he said, kissing her softly on her lips. Chapter 13. Darcy gently clasped Elizabeth's hand and guided her towards a field blanketed in tall grass, a secluded sanctuary for his heartfelt confession. This particular spot had inspired so many of his daydreams, the place in which he rehearsed countless times the words he would say and the steps he would take to win Elizabeth's heart forever. He wondered if it was too soon, yet it felt as though he had waited an eternity already. How long must a man so deeply smitten endure? Elizabeth's playful banter and teasing demeanour had captivated him unlike any other woman ever had, or likely ever would. He knew that earning a woman's trust was not something to be taken lightly. Only the promise of a shared future with her could convince him to proceed with his intentions. Silence hung between them as Darcy swept her up into his arms, carrying her those last few steps to their secluded spot within the meadow. He lowered her gently onto the grass and loosened his crisp white cravat before settling beside her. Their eyes met, hers filled with curiosity, his reflecting quiet assurance. A soft breeze stirred the air between them as he reached for her hand once more, his thumb tracing gentle circles upon her skin. Gradually their lips met in a tender kiss, one that deepened with each passing moment. His fingers brushed over the sleeve of her gown, tracing the fine muslin fabric with a touch both reverent and restrained. He lingered there, savouring the warmth of her nearness, the way she yielded to him with quiet trust. Her soft sighs stirred something deep within him, yet he held fast to his resolve. There was no need for haste, no desire to press beyond what this moment offered. Instead, he let the gentle rise and fall of her breath guide him, anchoring himself in the certainty of what lay ahead. To Darcy's delight, Elizabeth seemed unguarded in his embrace, her every movement a silent invitation for more closeness, more understanding, more of the unspoken promise between them. His hand rested lightly upon hers, his thumb drawing slow, reassuring circles as he whispered her name. Carefully he adjusted their positions, drawing her closer still. Whatever lay ahead, he knew with certainty that this was but the beginning. "Mr. Darcy! Oh, Mr. Darcy!" the sweetest voice rang out. The sound of his name falling from her lips in repetition encouraged him. The sun, higher in the sky than where it had been when they first arrived, at the spot in the meadow, gave him to know that it was going to be quite a delightful day not only for him, but for her as well. Indeed, a day to remember. And if there was a chance that their love-making would last until the evening came, he surely would have no cause to repine. No cause at all. Mr. Darcy, he woke with quite a start, not only flustered, but also a bit frustrated. His future wife's eyes were looking questioningly into his. It dawned on him that he must have fallen asleep. The book he had been reading lay open on his lap, and fortunately so for the sake of his own modesty, in view of a maid sitting quietly in a far corner of the apartment, albeit half asleep herself. "How long have you been awake?" he asked in a soft voice. "Long enough, I suppose. You were dreaming, and from the look on your face it was quite a dream." He straightened himself in his chair. "Indeed it was, my love, for I was dreaming of you and me, and the very first time we are together as one." "So you were dreaming of our wedding night?" "Well, not exactly," he responded sheepishly. Elizabeth coloured and laughed as she replied, "Mr. Darcy, did you dream that we had anticipated our vows?" Nodding, he lowered his voice. "I am guilty as charged." Elizabeth's playful spirits would not be repressed. She leaned closer to him. "Perhaps you might tell me about this dream." Standing, he said, "I think not. Besides, I believe it is far more interesting, to say nothing of more satisfying, to show you how my dream unfolded." Elizabeth trembled a little in hearing this, as though her entire body was awakening inside. "Then I ought to advise you that I have always fancied myself a fast learner," she teased. "I have no doubt." Feeling both excited and anxious, Elizabeth's heart skipped a beat when he sat on the bed beside her. A casual glance at the napping servant in the corner assured her she had no cause for concern. Upon taking her hand in his, Mr. Darcy raised it to his lips and brushed sweet kisses across her knuckles. "I believe I ought to go to London as soon as can be to secure a special licence, unless that meets with your objection, my love," he confessed softly. "Nothing would please me more," she heard herself reply. "The sooner I am your wife, the better." "I recall you saying the same earlier, but you were rather reluctant to be parted so soon. What has changed?" Gazing into his dark eyes, she tenderly stroked his chin. "You are not the only one who dreams, Mr. Darcy. I am looking forward to both of our dreams coming true." It was thus decided that Mr. Darcy would leave for London at morning's light. He leaned toward his lady-love and kissed her softly on her chin. "It gratifies me immensely that you and I are of the same mind as regards all the pleasures that await us as man and wife." Recalling a dream that she herself had dreamed not so long ago, Elizabeth's sentiments were indeed as one with her betrothed's, and she expressed them as sensibly and as warmly as a young woman violently in love who longed to be united as one with the gentleman who owned her heart could be supposed to do. Thank you for listening to Every Appearance of Cordiality, written by nom de plume Eden Forster and read by Ana-Rita, a professional human voice replica. Copyright 2016 by P.O. Dixon, with production copyright 2024. I hope you enjoyed the story and encourage you to like and comment to share your thoughts. If you enjoyed the story, why not explore my channel for even more captivating tales? With over 100 hours of professionally narrated audiobooks, along with titles read by the author as well as titles digitally narrated by professional human voice replicas, there's always another adventure waiting for you. I hope you'll keep listening and discover your next favourite story here.